Honourable members, please be seated. Honourable members, we will continue with this agenda item, and I now call on the Minister for Agriculture, Waterways and Environment, the Honourable Dr. Mahendra, Reddy, to deliver his ministerial statement. You have the floor.
Mr. Speaker, sir, Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Leader of Opposition, Honourable members, greetings to you all. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to thank you for allowing me to speak on this topic, Fiji Agriculture Census 2020 versus 2019-2020 HIS, issues of methodology and policy relevance for farming households. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise this morning to deliver a statement to this August House on the 2020 Fiji Agriculture Census coordinated by the Ministry of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, said the census report is in 4 volumes. I will not attempt to provide to this House the full findings of the survey, as it is just impossible to do so in 20 minutes. Rather, I intend to provide why the census was done, how different it is from the previous ones, and the methodology adopted, and why the previous census cannot be used to make inferences on the population farmers, and how our attempts to use the 2019-2020 HIS data to help farmers failed because of the limitations in the methodology of the 2019-2020 HIS survey. I will provide key defining features of the Fiji's agriculture sector as revealed by the census and some of the critical questions that various stakeholders can get answers for from this 2020 agriculture census survey. I will extend my analysis to the recent 2019-2020 HS report and how it fails to support the Ministry of Agriculture's effort to improve farmers' livelihood. Mr. Speaker said, the agriculture census enables the compilation of data at the community level and ensures that the issues affecting farmers, farming households, communities and agricultural operations are included when policy decisions are made on the matters that affect them in their livelihood. Decisions regarding resource allocation to the sectors, regions, villages, production, supply, procurement, marketing, and exports can be made using this data, only if it is collected and reported at the lowest level, that is, households in the villages and settlements. It supports and enhances the quality of evidence-based policy making, guides the development of agriculture statistics in Fiji, and addresses unprecedented data demand to monitor national targets and sustainable development goals. We can make sound policies that can be used for resource allocation, improvement of farmers' livelihood, expansion of agriculture output in the interest of all stakeholders involved in agriculture sector, as well as in national interest. Mr. Speaker said, taking into account the above, we noted that previous surveys had some very serious methodological weakness, which doesn't allow us to draw such policy pronouncements as alluded to above. Conducted every 10 years, there have been 4 other agriculture censuses undertaken before the 2020 agriculture census. The previous ones were held in 1968, 1978, 1991, and 2009. All censuses that I have highlighted above were conducted using a sampling methodology. 1968, a sample size of 17,000 was used. 1978, a sample size of 2,797 was used. 1991, a sample size of 9,607 was used. And the 2009 one, a sample size of 9,342 was used. Mr. Speaker said, we at the Ministry noted that this approach to sample farms did not assist us in making policies the way we wanted. The approach undertaken could not answer several queries that we had. For example, how many dairy farmers do we have in Fiji? How many Dalo farmers did we have in Fiji? Which area the Dalo productivity is much higher than the other areas so that we can focus on this area and improve or raise the productivity? Which area should be promoted for certain crops based on the farm level productivity? How many female-headed farm households do we have and what type of support and assistance do they need? What is the farm size and does it have any causal relationship with farm productivity or mechanization? How can poverty-stricken households be lifted out of poverty via government's agricultural support? What was the crop and livestock damage caused by a cyclone in that particular area? Mr. Speaker, say only if we have data on those areas, not through sample of households, or farming households, but all. So these kinds of detailed and finer policy questions cannot be addressed by obtaining data from just a small sample farm households. It was also decided to expand the scope of the coverage to consider other subsectors like forestry, fisheries, for the first time ever, Mr. Speaker said. We could have opted for the easier way out and ticked the box, like previous agriculture census. We'd have collected that data on a sample of farms, because we have to do this agriculture census every 10 years. We need to tick the box that we have done it. We could have collected data from a sample of farms and drawn up productivity at the national level. We could have done the sample survey and ticked that the fifth agriculture census after 10 years is done. Instead, we decided to do a national population survey of agriculture farm households in Fiji. Mr. Speaker said, it is for this reason that the 2020 agriculture census is the first where the ministry conducted a full enumeration of Fiji's agriculture sector right up to the urban boundary, should there be agriculture activity happening there. Mr. Speaker said, the 2020 agriculture census recorded a total of 70,991 agriculture households compared to the 65,000 households that were recorded in 2009. The total agriculture households accounted for 99.1%. So, Mr. Speaker said, of all those surveyed in this survey, 99.1% were indeed agriculture households, and some of them were not agriculture households. Mr. Speaker said, of the 2017 population and housing census, 191,910 households are there in Fiji, total households in Fiji. Of that, 37% are agricultural households. Mr. Speaker, say implemented from 10th to 29th February, so that's the enumeration period, Mr. Speaker, said, agriculture census operation engaged 314 government officials from all agriculture land ministries and 430 external enumerators. Mr. Speaker said the 2020 agriculture census findings were released in 4 volumes. The first highlights the general tables and descriptive analysis. The second volume on enumeration and areas and data district profiles. The third volume was a special release on gender analysis based on census finding. The fourth volume focused on administrative processes and guide implementation of the census and the details of methodology. Mr. Speaker said, we now have set a firm foundation for the 2020 agriculture census. Mr. Speaker said, having done this massive exercise, we then decided that we should make targeted policy interventions to address critical national issues. We wanted to use other recent surveys, synchronize or map it with our farm household level data, in particular the HIS. For that, we wanted to ensure that the methodology, so whenever you compare 2 surveys, we have to ensure that the methodology is solid and is credible. Mr. Speaker said, we as policymakers, when we release any data to the public or make any statement that will ultimately affect people's choices and their livelihood, we must provide details of how we collected the data with full disclosure of the research methodology. Mr. Speaker said, if you look at the 2020 agriculture census report, the entire volume 4, Mr. Speaker said, the entire volume 4 is on methodology, 183 pages. So that anyone, Mr. Speaker said, would want to know how this data was collected, full details about the methodology, the questionnaire, etc. Mr. Speaker said, they'll pick up the volume 4 and they'll go over it, they'll get details of the methodology. Mr. Speaker said, we wanted to use the HIS data and map it with our agriculture census. Mr. Speaker said, unfortunately, when we looked at the methodology, we found that there was only 2 pages written about the methodology. We had no idea, Mr. Speaker said. We had no idea how the data was collected, Mr. Speaker said. Just a two-pager. Mr. Speaker said, the cardinal rule in any research is, you must provide a detailed methodology so that any person wanting to check the data, they should be able to replicate. They should be able to replicate the methodology and get the same data. Mr. Speaker said, I'm afraid the HIS report fails this test of full methodology disclosure. Mr. Speaker said, the HIS survey, the recent 2019-2020, fails this test of full methodology disclosure. My next one, Mr. Speaker said, let me now talk about the enumeration and reference period. Mr. Speaker said the agriculture census used a 3-week enumeration period. Enumeration period is the period that we go down and collect data and so we get a snapshot of the key variable under study. That time was 10th February 2020 to 29th February 2020. 3 weeks, we went down to collect the data, Mr. Speaker said. From day one of the survey, we were mindful that we must capture the farmers at a particular point in time so that we're talking about the same reference period, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said, reference period is the period for which we are collecting the data. Enumeration period is when you are going to the farmers to collect the data. Mr. Speaker said, unfortunately, when you look at the HIS survey, the HIS used a 12-month enumeration period, Mr. Speaker said. So, Mr. Speaker said, the household expenditure, income and expenditure survey was undertaken from February 2019 to February 2020. So I've got 12 months of enumeration period. So Mr. Speaker said, now how on earth can you compare data of households who were interviewed in February 19 and those households who were interviewed in February 2020? Mr. Speaker said, no, their reference period, and also Mr. Speaker said, their reference periods are very different because February 2019, Mr. Speaker said, February 2019, their reference period is 12 months before. So February 2018. And then February 2020, their reference period comes to 2019. Mr. Speaker said, how on earth can you lump this data, which has data collected in two different reference periods? Two different reference periods. You guys were defending, Mr. Speaker said. They were defending this methodology. Mr. Speaker said, a lot can change over 12 months. Different prices, different consumption bundles due to production and supply patterns, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said, the HIS report is flawed because data for two different reference periods are lumped together. February 2019, their 1 year before data is lumped with February 2020. Two different data periods are lumped together. Mr. Speaker said, let me drop another bomb. Order. Mr. Speaker said, Order. TC Sarai made landfall on 24 December 2019. TC Tino made landfall on 18 January 2020. Mr. Speaker said, how can you include these households from 24 December to 28 February 2020 with February 2019 households? Two different. You've got TC Sarai, category 2 cyclone. TC Sarai and TC Tino made landfall in the later part of the survey. You cannot add households in these two different periods, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said, ask any statistician and they will tell you that you have to avoid any outliers or shocks in survey period because all other households were not subject to the same shock. The Bureau makes no mention of how they have addressed these issues, which again affects the ability to place all households in one pool. Mr. Speaker said, I could have assisted them by saying, look, these are two different reference periods. You calculate the poverty for these 2 different periods, collect the data, show the poverty estimates for 2 different periods, and then you can lump it and leave it to the readers. They didn't do that, Mr. Speaker said. They didn't do that. Mr. Speaker said, why can't they do that? I'll tell you why they couldn't do that. I'll tell you. They mucked it up with a low sample size. I'll come to that. Mr. Speaker said, I'm afraid the Bureau has failed this test for not addressing shocks and outliers. Mr. Speaker said, that takes me to the sample size issue. Mr. Speaker said, agriculture census collected data on all farm households so that robust policy decisions can be made. When you go down to Kandavu or etc., we want to know what happened to these farmers in the village in Dongituki, etc. Mr. Speaker said, we know we have the data. We know how we need to assist. However, in contrast, the 2019-2020 household income and expenditure survey used a sample of 6,000 to inform 191,910 households. The normal rule in statistics is that the size of the sample should be a function of how homogeneous the study variable is in population. In this case, the study variable is households, income and expenditure. Any one of us who has traveled widely in Fiji will say that households throughout Fiji are very heterogeneous. So such a low sample size, 3.1%, is well below a reasonable threshold for fair representation of the population. In fact, the 2002 household income and expenditure survey had a sample size of 3.3% households, number of 5,245. For the 2013-14 household income expenditure survey, the sample size was 6,020. So now, knowing that Fiji's household population is quite heterogeneous, households number have increased from the previous HIS period, then why would the Bureau keep the sample around the same? Mr. Speaker said, the answer is simple. The answer is simple. I have it. It was a tick in the box exercise. It was tick in the box exercise. Mr. Speaker said, let me now go to the design. It pains. The design has serious problems, Mr. Speaker said. There are 23 stratum areas. Each stratum has on an average 10 households. Ask anyone with statistics and econometrics background, they will tell you, you can't infer without a certain degree of reliability, whether it's 5% level of significance or 2.5% level of significance, the attributes around, let's say, 319 households with the data from 10 households. No way. And I'll tell you why. Firstly, for statistical analysis requires variability in the data. Mr. Speaker said, if you collect 10 households in this area, to do any statistical analysis, that data from the 10 households, there should be variability. Otherwise, you can't do statistical analysis. You can't invert in the statistical terms, you can't invert the metrics. Mr. Speaker said, so ask statistics, they will tell you that without variation, you can't. Metrician will tell you that cross-sectional data prices doesn't vary. It doesn't vary because it's a point in time. You're collecting data for a point in time. How can you then say you can do a statistical analysis with 10 households? No. And if you look at, their advisor, Honorable Professor Watanarsi, read his report, he admits in one of his previous reports that he was finding it difficult to do statistical analysis because of the low sample in the previous HIS report. And Mr. Speaker said, I am shocked to read that some of the economists at USP and University of Fiji have both argued otherwise and states that 6,000 sample size can be used to infer reliably on 191,910 households. Mr. Speaker said, I don't blame them. Mr. Speaker said, because they have not done primary research. Mr. Speaker said, they have always used secondary data collected by others. In fact, Professor Watanarsi, Mr. Speaker said, it pains him. Mr. Speaker said, primary research is a different ballgame. You define the research problem. Who defined in this case? Bureau of Stats. You state the hypothesis. Who did it? Bureau of Stats. You designed the questionnaire. Who did it? Bureau of Stats. You established the methodology? Bureau of Stats. Who collected the data? Bureau of Stats. Who did the analysis? Consultants. They take it, they get the money, and they publish it, they get the academic advancement. Mr. Speaker say, they are always after someone else's collected data, someone else's investment, Mr. Speaker say. Mr. Speaker say, you go and survey in any economics department, 95% of the academics, they will work with secondary data from Bureau of State, from Reserve Bank of Fiji. They are now, Mr. Speaker say, his friend Dr. Nilesh Gaundal called me, Doc, when can we get this data? When can we get this data? Ask him. Thereafter, Mr. Speaker say, we collected, they have no input on the methodology, no idea. They want data. They'll publish it, get academic. Mr. Speaker say, now let me go on to the agriculture census and HIS policy making dilemma. Mr. Speaker say, we now have detailed data on all farm households in Fiji. If we had HIS poverty data for rural households, we could have synchronized it. If, let's say, the HIS data shows that in Dongutuki village, the households are in poverty, I would have gone and channeled the agricultural resources to that area to raise those households out of poverty. Mr. Speaker say, where is the poverty data? There's no data. Because, Mr. Speaker say, our data, we have collected a division, province, district, village, settlement. Their data, a rural, urban.
Order.
Read it. Mr. Speaker say, their data, look at the HIS data, is only a rural, urban, western, rural, urban, Mr. Speaker. What do you do? Mr. Speaker say, it's a total waste. Mr. Speaker say, from the 2020 X census, we can ask targeted questions, Mr. Speaker say, in 2020 X census. Mr. Speaker say, but when we want to do this, when we want to do a targeted assistance to farmers in a particular area because their productivity is low, Mr. Speaker say, we don't want to know ethnicity. We don't need ethnicity. We're gonna assist whoever needs a particular support assistance, Mr. Speaker say. Mr. Speaker say, why people are poor in the rural interior maritime? Because people like Noaikula have been doing things on ethnicity. Because people like Noaikula has always been talking on ethnicity. Honorable Noaikula, my apologies. Mr. Speaker say, when I first joined Agriculture Ministry, one of the first things I asked was, where is the desegregated farm level household data? Mr. Speaker said the reply I got was, we don't have it. For none of the census, there was desegregated farm level household data. Mr. Speaker say, order. We have now got desegregated farm level household data. Come 10 years time, what you could do is longitudinal study. I don't think they understand what longitudinal study is. Mr. Speaker say, if we find that in Kandavu, these households' agriculture productivity is low, 10 years down the line, we can pull the data up and compare with what's the productivity now. Mr. Speaker say, if we had the same kind of data for poverty, 10 years down the line, we could have then identified that household and say whether the households have been lifted out of poverty or not, Mr. Speaker say. But Mr. Speaker say, what do we do with this data that they have got here? There's no desegregated data. No desegregated data by household level. Now, Mr. Speaker say, we spend so much taxpayers' money, in 10 years down the line, I want to know whether in Dongutuku village, the poverty level was this 5 years ago. What's the poverty now? How do I know? There's no data. What's the use of doing this kind of survey, Mr. Speaker say? Mr. Speaker say, the agriculture census was undertaken for a budget of 4.5 million. Per household, it was $62. The HIS survey was conducted at a budget of 2.5 million. Per household, it is $416. 6.6 times more. What a waste, Mr. Speaker said. What a waste, Mr. Speaker said, when you can't do any policy inferences at that level, at the village, at the settlement level, Mr. Speaker said. Mr. Speaker said, unfortunately, this HIS study is one, it is tick in the box. Number two, it's a field day for consultants who have made money, who take the data, publish journal articles, Mr. Speaker said, and get their own academic advancement, but it has nothing, it has no input in terms of making sharper and specific policy intervention so that we can assist the very people that they are talking about. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Minister for his statement, and I now give the floor. Order. I give the floor to the designated speaker for the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Inosi Kurindrani. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, before I respond to the ministerial statement by the Honourable Minister, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank a youth group in the province of Nadronga Nabosa call themselves the Haku Gang. Comprise about 33 youths from the province that reside locally and abroad. They've been reviving the old age traditional solo-solo approach to suit the context of the digital era in bringing much needed help to our elderly and families facing crisis. They have so far collected $12,000 in 3 of their virtual concerts and have assisted more than 300 families. Nabale Buhako Gang, Tubata Tungata. Mr. Speaker, sir, also like to thank the Minister for Agriculture, Honourable Minister Reddy, for approving a seawall that is finally approved, and hopefully it will be constructed in the near future. Thank you, Mr. Reddy. However, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is very sad and very poor of the Minister to admit in this House that he don't understand how this report was prepared. He admitted it. And I recall his statements previously, the methodology. He claimed that the methodology in preparing this report he don't understand. Mr. Speaker, sir, I recall his speech in 2018. Mr. Speech, he said, "Sir, reliable and timely agriculture data provides farmers, producers, consumers, buyers, exporters, and governments the information that is required to make well-informed decisions in business and policy." However, Mr. Speaker, sir, in this census report, volume 4, which has been talking about, it reads on question 5, what is the household member's ethnicity? It is recommended that the question is answered through observation by the enumerators, but may be asked directly if respondent feels comfortable about answering the question. It will be answered by selecting one of the ethnicity categories given below: Itauke, Indo-Fijian, Chinese, Rotuman, other Pacific Islanders. In question 6, it reads, what is the household member religious denomination? Methodist, Catholic, AOG, Hindu, Muslim, SDA? Mr. Speaker, sir, this raw data that was collected by the enumerators does not appear in any of the volume he's talking about, from volume 1 to volume 4. So he's lying. He's lying in this House that these data are not collected. This is the proof. It has been collected. And is this the same the same measure that the Attorney General that speak about the household survey a few weeks back, a few days ago. I think that the ethnicity data was not collected, and it appears in the recent report. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, these people have been lying. They've been lying all this time. If this is a measure to indicate the level of integrity and good governance by this government, we are doubt. We are heading for a big disaster. Mr. Speaker, sir. They are lying. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg the government, please, do the right thing. Do the right thing. You know very well that ethnicity is very important in developing policies and for people. I asked Mr. Reddy, how many Itoke people are in commercial farming? He wouldn't know. So how can he design policy to meet the target groups? That is the problem. So they're trying to hide a fact of development that's supposed to be, probably discrimination. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg the government, please be honest. Be honest with your job. Thank you very much.
I thank the Honourable Member for his contribution to the debate. I now give the floor to the Leader of the National Federation Party, the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I had a little bit more time, I would have really exposed the honourable joker that we had in Parliament today. And I say this because, Mr. Speaker, he completely missed the point. Agriculture census. This is household expenditure survey. How can you compare a census data with a survey data? A complete joker. And then, Mr. Speaker, to make it, embarrassing for himself, he went on a despicable, shameful attack on his former colleagues, saying that they haven't done primary surveys. Completely bogus. He should be ashamed of attacking his colleagues completely. He should be ashamed. He should be ashamed. So he's completely, Mr. Speaker, completely missed the point. I'm sure people who would read his presentation today or were listening to him will actually find how shameful and ridiculous his claims have been in his ministerial statement. And Mr. Speaker, let me tell him, for a long time back, this man has surrendered his academic credentials to his political masters. And what he has done today, Mr. Speaker, what is done today is to discredit not only his own colleagues, experts. He doesn't know the difference between census and survey. He talked about methodology. All the experts, Mr. Speaker, have said the methodology is sound, the sample size is sound. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in Australia and New Zealand, they do household income expenditure survey, and their sample size, Mr. Speaker, is about 1%. Fiji Bureau of Statistics sample of 3% is a very, very credible sample in a survey. And this man doesn't know the difference between census and survey. I have to laugh, Mr. Speaker. I have to really laugh, What is happening, Mr. Speaker? What is happening here? What is happening here? At least the Honourable Attorney General, was a bit professional, in terms of his press conference attacking the methodology and the sample size. One could understand that. But the real reason, Mr. Speaker, the real reason why they are discrediting this survey is because it looks bad on them, politically bad on them. All the claims of unprecedented growth, Bainimarama boom, you know, how they have looked after everybody, has been thrown back at them through the household income expenditure poverty rate. Since 2008 and 2009 survey report, they have not been able to reduce poverty in this country, Mr. Speaker. Now, politically, it looks so bad to them because all their claims, all their lies about unprecedented growth, how well they've done, is all been exposed now. But the most dangerous thing that they have set in train, Mr. Speaker, by discrediting this report and the hard-working people, you know, who have years of experience. Bureau of Statistics, Fiji Bureau of Statistics is the best in the Pacific. You compare all the national statistical officers and look at what Fiji Bureau of Statistics has done. Now, by discrediting this report, Mr. Speaker, and the figure, what they have done is they have poured cold water on all the official statistics. And now, Mr. Speaker, we can say this with some certainty, that this government has been cooking official data. They are discrediting this data because they were not able to cook this and manipulate this. This is the reason why they are so desperate, Mr. Speaker, to discredit this survey. What I would say to them, Mr. Speaker, and you know, this pathetic attempt by the Honourable Minister for Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, I can only go back and laugh somewhere, you know, in my own, quietness. But this attempt, I mean, the man doesn't know the difference between census and a survey, and comes here and compares a survey and a census. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Order.
Completely, you know.
Order.
Shame on him, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Minister of Economy, please tell him in your quiet time, you know, that, you know, he needs to understand what's the difference between census and a survey. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. I thank the Honourable Biman Prasad for his contribution